Jesus revealed the invisible watchers, Jesus and the vision the church buried for centuries. Humanity was taught that sight is limited to what the eyes can measure and the mind can explain. Yet Jesus taught something far more unsettling, something so disruptive that it was deliberately removed from accepted scripture. He taught that the greatest threat to human freedom was not sin, war, or ignorance, but invisibility. Forces that cannot be seen, cannot be questioned, resisted, or exposed. In the earliest traditions attributed to Jesus, particularly those preserved by his closest followers outside institutional control, sight was not symbolic, it was literal. To see was to break power. To observe was to dismantle manipulation. The opening of this teaching was never mystical spectacle. It was sober, practical, and grounded in awareness. Jesus warned that humanity lived surrounded by influences operating just beyond normal perception, feeding on emotional reaction and unconscious behavior. These entities did not rule through strength, but through remaining unseen. The first 30 seconds of this knowledge change everything, because once the idea is planted that the human eye was intentionally limited, a deeper question arises. What else was removed? What else was hidden? Jesus did not ask people to believe blindly. He asked them to look, not upward, not inward, but around. The chosen were not chosen by blood or status, but by willingness to see without fear. This is where the story truly begins, not with miracles, but with vision. Vision that threatens systems built on obedience. Vision that collapses authority, that depends on ignorance. Jesus understood that once people could directly observe the forces influencing their thoughts, the entire structure of control would fail. That is why this teaching vanished. That is why it returns now. The entities later called Archons were never described as myths by early followers. They were described as administrators of limitation, wardens of perception. According to suppressed texts, they occupied layers of reality adjacent to the material world, close enough to interact, distant enough to remain unseen. Their greatest weapon was not cruelty, but concealment. Jesus explained that human perception was narrowed deliberately, allowing only a fragment of reality to be acknowledged as real. This was not a flaw. It was a design. By influencing emotion, these entities could guide behavior without ever being identified. Fear felt personal. Anger felt justified. Despair felt inevitable. And because the source was invisible, humanity blamed itself. Jesus taught that once the source is seen, the illusion collapses. An observed manipulator loses authority. The early disciples understood this, which is why questions of sight appear repeatedly in the texts that survive destruction. Vision was always framed as liberation, never as fantasy. The church could tolerate metaphorical sight, but not literal perception. A believer who imagines evil is manageable. A believer who sees it is not. This is why the teaching was labeled dangerous. Not because it invited chaos, but because it ended dependency. Jesus did not teach clairvoyance. He did not promote altered states or mystical escapism. His method was grounded in the body, specifically in the mechanics of human vision. He taught that the eye receives far more information than the mind allows to surface. The brain filters aggressively, discarding anything that contradicts consensus reality. This filter is learned, reinforced from birth, and maintained through fear of the unknown. Jesus revealed that peripheral vision operates under a different set of rules. It detects movement, subtle distortion, and frequency shifts before logic intervenes. Most people experience this briefly. A shadow in the corner of the eye, dismissed immediately. Jesus taught his followers not to dismiss it. Instead, he instructed them to soften their gaze, to stop hunting for meaning, and to allow perception to stabilize. This was not imagination. It was unlearning suppression. Over time, the brain adjusts, allowing previously rejected information to remain visible. This is the foundation of the technique that survived quietly. Pasethoragi, never written plainly, waiting for a time when it could no longer be erased. The practice itself was deceptively simple, which made it unstoppable once discovered. In low light, where contrast exists, but clarity remains, the chosen were taught to relax the eyes, releasing focus rather than sharpening it. This soft gaze widened awareness instead of narrowing it. Attention moved from fixation to field. At first, the mind resisted, craving definition and certainty. But persistence changed perception. Subtle distortions appeared, movement without cause, shapes without edges. Jesus warned not to chase them, because direct focus reactivated the filter. Instead, awareness was to remain open, patient, and still. Over days, the mind learned that these perceptions were consistent, not random, and consistency is what breaks denial. When the first entity became visible long enough to react, to move in response to observation, doubt collapsed. Imagination does not flee observation. Something real does. This moment marked the irreversible shift. Once seen, it could never be unseen. Visibility inverted the power dynamic completely. The entities that thrived on emotional reaction weakened under observation. Feeding required ignorance. Once awareness replaced unconscious response, their influence faded. Jesus emphasized that no ritual was required, no authority invoked. Seeing was enough. Where people expected confrontation, there was retreat. Where fear once ruled, clarity emerged. The Chosen reported that these entities avoided spaces where they were consistently observed, not banished by force, but displaced by exposure. Darkness does not survive inspection. This principle extended beyond the individual. Locations saturated with emotional density revealed clusters of these entities, explaining patterns of exhaustion, despair, and conflict. Long accepted as human nature, Jesus' teaching reframed suffering not as moral failure, but as exploitation enabled by blindness. The most difficult realization came when the Chosen began to see these influences attached to others, loved ones, strangers. Entire crowds moved under unseen pressure. Jesus warned against confrontation. Awareness was not a weapon to impose, but a responsibility to carry. Attempting to awaken those unprepared would only reinforce denial. Instead, the Chosen were instructed to remain clear, unattached, and visible. By maintaining their own perception, they disrupted the field subtly, reducing the effectiveness of manipulation around them. This was quiet resistance, rooted in stability rather than rebellion. Jesus understood that systems collapse, not through attack, but through Jesus taught that visibility was the final defense because it could not be revoked. Prayer could be doubted. Ritual could be forgotten. Authority could be challenged. But once perception expands, it remains expanded. This is why the teaching was buried. It created individuals who could not be governed through fear. This soft gaze, practiced briefly each day, reclaims what was always present. You are not summoning anything. You are noticing, and what is noticed loses its grip. This was the quiet revolution Jesus offered. Not salvation through belief, but freedom through sight.